The dust of Meadow Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1879, settled beneath the hooves of Cole Matthews' horse as he rode into town, his weathered hat pulled low against the blinding sun. In his saddlebag rested a letter from his late brother, the last piece of family he had left in this world. It wasn't grief that drove Cole toward the modest homestead at the edge of town, but a promise to a dying man that he would check on his family, now left alone in this unforgiving frontier. Margaret Fletcher stood at the window of her small cabin, watching her 3 children play in the yard. 6 months since Thomas had been taken by fever, and the weight of raising William, Sarah, and little James alone pressed heavier with each passing day. The homestead needed constant attention. The cattle required tending, and winter would arrive before she knew it. But what troubled her most as she observed her children was how they grew wilder by the day, their education neglected amid the daily struggles of survival. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside to call the children in for supper when she spotted the rider approaching. Strangers were rare this far from town, and Margaret instinctively reached for the rifle propped beside the door. "That's far enough," she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The children scurried behind her skirts, peeking out at the tall man atop the chestnut stallion. Cole raised both hands slowly. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm Cole Matthews. I was Thomas's friend." He reached carefully into his pocket and extracted the folded letter. "I made him a promise." Margaret lowered the rifle slightly but kept it ready. "Thomas never mentioned a Cole Matthews. We rode together in the war. Later, we worked cattle drives from Texas up to Kansas." Cole's voice softened. "I was with him in Abilene when he got your letter about the baby. Never saw a man so eager to get home." Margaret's eyes narrowed at the mention of James's birth. It was specific enough to give her pause. "Step down, Mr. Matthews," slowly. Cole dismounted, keeping his movements deliberate, and extended the letter. Margaret's fingers trembled slightly as she took it, recognizing her husband's uneven handwriting immediately. She read it quickly, her eyes filling with tears as Thomas's words confirmed Cole's story and asked her to trust this man who had been like a brother to him. "I suppose you'd better come in for supper, Mr. Matthews," she said finally, lowering the rifle completely. "Children, say hello to your Uncle Cole." The children stared up at him with curious eyes. William, the oldest at 8, stepped forward first with a serious expression that reminded Cole painfully of Thomas. 7-year-old Sarah stayed close to her mother, while 4-year-old James toddled forward with unrestrained curiosity. "Are you really our uncle?" William asked suspiciously. Cole knelt down to the boy's level. "Not by blood, but your father and I were as close as brothers. And I promised him I'd check on you all." Inside the cabin, Margaret served a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Cole noticed the careful way she portioned the food, ensuring the children had plenty while taking less for herself. The cabin was clean but sparse, with signs of repairs done by inexperienced hands. A leaking roof had been patched, and one window was covered with oilcloth instead of glass. As they ate, Cole observed how the children wolfed down their food with little regard for manners. William spilled his cup twice, and Sarah ate with her fingers instead of the spoon beside her plate. Only Margaret maintained any semblance of etiquette, gently reminding the children to slow down between bites. "How long do you plan to stay in Meadow Springs, Mr. Matthews?" Margaret asked, breaking the silence. Cole wiped his mouth with a bandana. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Thomas asked me to make sure you were all right. I can see you're managing, but—" "But what, Mr. Matthews?" There was an edge to her voice. "These children," Cole said carefully, setting down his fork. "They need schooling." Margaret's spine stiffened. "You think I don't know that? The schoolhouse is 10 miles away in town. I can't spare William to ride there and back each day. I need his help here. And I can't leave the homestead to take them myself." "No offense intended, madam," Cole said, tipping his head. "I just know Thomas wanted his children educated." Margaret's eyes flashed with a mixture of pride and defiance. "Then I'll teach them myself, beside the fire, after the day's work is done. I may not have formal education, Mr. Matthews, but I can read and cipher well enough." Cole nodded, impressed by her determination. "I didn't mean to overstep." "Yes, you did," Margaret said, but there was less heat in her voice. "But you're right about one thing. They've grown wild since Thomas." She glanced at the children and didn't finish the sentence. After supper, Cole insisted on sleeping in the barn despite Margaret's reluctant offer of the floor by the hearth. As he settled into the hay, listening to the soft nickering of his horse and the Fletchers' 2 milk cows, Cole found himself thinking about Thomas's widow. Her fierce independence and the quiet dignity with which she faced her circumstances stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Cole woke before dawn and set to work repairing the loose boards on the barn wall. By the time Margaret emerged from the cabin, he had already fixed the leaking roof and was chopping firewood. "Mr. Matthews," she called, watching him split a log with one powerful swing. "I didn't ask for your help." Cole set down the axe and wiped sweat from his brow. "No, madam, you didn't. But Thomas would have my hide if I rode away leaving his roof unfixed." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded curtly. "There's coffee if you want it." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Cole worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing what needed fixing around the homestead. Margaret continued her daily chores, keeping a watchful eye on him while maintaining a careful distance. The children, however, quickly warmed to Cole, especially young James, who followed him like a shadow. One evening, after the children were in bed, Margaret found Cole sitting on the porch steps, carving a small wooden horse. "That's for James?" she asked, settling beside him with a cup of tea. Cole nodded. "Boy needs something to play with besides sticks and rocks." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Why are you really here, Mr. Matthews?" Margaret finally asked. "Thomas has been gone 6 months. If you made him a promise, you could have checked on us and moved on." Cole's hands stilled on the carving. "I've been drifting for 15 years, Mrs. Fletcher. After the war, nothing felt like home anymore. Thomas was the only family I had left." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I guess I'm not ready to say goodbye to him yet." Margaret studied his profile in the fading light. "You can stay through the harvest," she said abruptly. "We could use the help, but I'll pay you fair wages. I don't want your money." "I don't accept charity, Mr. Matthews." Cole glanced at her stubborn expression and nodded. "All right. But call me Cole. Mr. Matthews makes me feel like my father." A smile touched Margaret's lips briefly. "Then you should call me Margaret." The following evening, Cole returned from mending fences to find Margaret sitting at the table with the children, books and slates spread before them. William was laboriously copying letters while Sarah counted beans, moving them from one pile to another. Even little James had a slate, making wobbly circles with a piece of chalk. "They need school," Cole had said, and true to her word, Margaret was teaching them beside the fire, though the summer heat made a fire unnecessary. "Come in, Cole," Margaret called when she noticed him standing in the doorway. "We're just finishing our lessons." William looked up with a frown. "Mama says I have to learn to write my letters before I can help with the branding in the fall." "Your mama's right," Cole said, setting his hat on a peg. "A man needs to know his letters. I've seen cowpunchers cheat each other blind because one couldn't read the tally." William's eyes widened at this practical application of learning, and he bent back over his slate with renewed determination. Cole sat down at the table and picked up one of the books. "The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe," he read. This was Thomas's favorite. Margaret looked surprised. "You knew that. We had a lot of time to talk on those cattle drives," Cole said, turning the worn pages carefully. "He told me how his mother read to him every night and how he wanted to do the same for his children." "He did," Margaret said softly, "every night until—" She cleared her throat. "I've tried to continue, but after working from dawn until dusk, sometimes I'm too tired to see the words clearly." "Would you like me to read tonight?" Cole offered, and so began another ritual. After the evening lessons, Cole would read a chapter of Robinson Crusoe, his deep voice bringing the adventure to life. The children gathered around him, their eyes wide with wonder, while Margaret sat in her rocking chair, mending clothes and watching the easy way Cole interacted with her children. As the days stretched into weeks, the rigid formality between Cole and Margaret began to thaw. They worked side by side in the fields, bringing in the modest wheat crop that would see them through the winter. He taught William how to mend, tack, and track animals, while she showed Sarah how to preserve the vegetables from their garden. They moved together in an efficient rhythm, like partners who had worked together for years rather than weeks. The change in the children was remarkable. With consistent lessons and the stability Cole's presence provided, they thrived. William's reading improved rapidly. Sarah discovered a talent for arithmetic, and even little James began forming letters. Margaret's face glowed with pride when Cole commented on their progress. "You're a good teacher," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her tired face. "I had a good education before I married Thomas. My father believed girls should learn the same as boys. A progressive man." "He was," she agreed. "He wanted me to become a school teacher, but then I met Thomas and—" She looked out at the darkened fields. "I don't regret it, not for a moment, but sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if I'd followed that path." "You'd still be teaching," Cole pointed out. "Just in a proper schoolhouse instead of beside your fire." Margaret laughed softly. "I suppose that's true." As summer turned to fall, Cole found himself thinking less about moving on and more about reasons to stay. The problem was Margaret herself. Despite their growing friendship, she maintained a careful barrier between them. Whenever a moment became too intimate, she would find a reason to step away or change the subject. Cole respected her boundaries, understanding that her heart still belonged to his friend. The situation changed on a crisp October day when Cole took William hunting. The boy had shown real skill with the small rifle Cole had taught him to use, and they were after rabbit for the stew pot. They had been gone longer than expected, and as they approached the homestead, Cole noticed too much smoke billowing from behind the cabin. "Stay here," he ordered William, breaking into a run. He rounded the corner to find the small storage shed fully engulfed in flames. Margaret and Sarah were frantically passing buckets of water from the well, while little James sat crying on a stump, safely away from the fire. "Margaret," Cole shouted, grabbing a bucket and joining the line. "Are you hurt?" "No," she gasped, her face streaked with soot. But the winter stores, they fought the fire for nearly an hour, but the shed couldn't be saved. When the flames finally died down, leaving nothing but charred wood and ashes, Margaret stood staring at the ruin, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "All the preserved vegetables," she said numbly. "The smoked meat, the extra flour and sugar, everything we needed for winter." Cole placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll manage, Margaret. We can hunt more, dry the meat. There's still time before the first snow." She shook her head, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. It's not enough time. We were already cutting it close. That night, after the children were asleep, Margaret sat at the table, pencil in hand, trying to calculate how they would survive the winter. Cole watched her silently, seeing the desperation in her eyes. "There's a solution," he said finally, "one you won't like." Margaret looked up, her expression wary. "What solution?" "I have money," Cole said. "Enough to see you through the winter and then some. I've been saving for years, not having much to spend it on." "No," Margaret said immediately. "I told you we don't accept." "It's not charity," Cole interrupted. "It's a loan. You can pay me back next harvest." Margaret shook her head stubbornly. "I won't be indebted to you." "Then marry me." The words hung in the silence between them. Margaret stared at him, shock replacing the worry on her face. "What did you say?" Cole hadn't meant to propose. The words had emerged unbidden, but now that they were spoken, he found he meant them completely. "Marry me," he repeated, more gently. "Not just for the money or the help around the farm, though God knows you need both. Marry me because these past months have been the happiest I can remember, because those children have worked their way into my heart. Because when I think about riding away from here, I can't breathe for the pain of it." Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're asking out of duty to Thomas." "No," Cole said firmly. "I fulfilled my promise to Thomas months ago. I'm asking because I love you, Margaret. I think I've loved you since that first night when you told me you'd teach your children yourself beside the fire rather than let them go without learning." "I can't," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm still Thomas's wife in my heart." "I know," Cole said. "And I would never ask you to stop loving him. But is there room in your heart for someone else too?" Margaret turned away, her shoulders shaking slightly. "I need time to think." Cole stood and reached for his hat. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight." The next morning, Cole rode into town with William. They returned with supplies to rebuild the storage shed and enough provisions to replace what had been lost. Margaret watched them unload the wagon, her expression unreadable. "Consider it an advance on my wages," Cole said when she started to protest. "Or a loan, if you prefer. No strings attached." For the next week they worked together rebuilding the shed, their conversation limited to necessary communication about the task at hand. The easy camaraderie they had developed was replaced by an awkward tension that even the children noticed. "Are you leaving us, Uncle Cole?" William asked one evening as Cole tucked him into bed. The question caught Cole off guard. "Why would you think that? You and Mama don't talk anymore. And you look sad." Cole sighed, smoothing the boy's hair back from his forehead. "It's complicated, William. Grown-up things usually are." "I don't want you to go," the boy said fiercely. "You teach me things like Pa did." Cole's throat tightened. "I don't want to go either, partner." Later that night, Cole sat alone on the porch steps, looking up at the stars and wondering if he had ruined everything with his impulsive proposal. He didn't hear Margaret until she settled beside him, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "The children are worried you're leaving," she said softly. "I know. William asked me tonight." They sat in silence for a while, the distant howl of a coyote the only sound disturbing the quiet night. "I've been unfair to you," Margaret finally said. "You've done nothing but help us, asking nothing in return, and I've been cold to you this past week. You have every right to your feelings, Margaret." "Do I?" She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do I have the right to deny my children a father who clearly loves them? Do I have the right to deny myself?" She hesitated. "Deny yourself what?" Cole asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Happiness," she whispered. "The chance to love again." Cole reached out slowly and took her hand. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Margaret's fingers tightened around his. "I'm saying I need more time, but I'm also saying I don't want you to leave. And I'm saying that when I imagine my future now, you're in it." It wasn't a yes, but it was hope, and for Cole, that was enough. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. The new shed stood strong, filled with provisions for the months ahead. Inside the cabin, Margaret continued teaching the children beside the fire, now a necessity against the growing cold. Cole built them desks from salvaged wood, and they arranged the small cabin into a schoolroom by day and a home by night. The close quarters brought them together in unexpected ways. Cole taught the children songs he had learned on cattle drives. Margaret shared stories from her own childhood, and in the evenings, they took turns reading from the small collection of books Thomas had accumulated over the years. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. Cole rode into town and returned with small gifts hidden in his saddlebags. Margaret secretly sewed new shirts for the boys and a dress for Sarah from fabric she had been saving. Together, they cut a small pine tree from the edge of their property and set it up in the corner of the cabin. On Christmas Eve, after the children had hung their stockings and gone to bed with promises that Santa wouldn't come until they were asleep, Cole and Margaret sat by the fire, wrapping the modest gifts in scraps of cloth and paper. "I have something for you," Cole said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box beautifully carved with intricate floral patterns. "I made it myself." Margaret took the box with trembling hands and opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. "Cole, it's beautiful. Open it," he urged softly. Margaret carefully opened the locket to find a tiny photograph of Thomas on one side, carefully cut from the larger photograph that hung on the cabin wall. The other side was empty. "I thought," Cole said hesitantly, "that you might want to keep him close to your heart. And maybe someday, if you wanted, there might be room for someone else too." Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she closed the locket and clutched it to her chest. "Thank you for understanding that I'll always love him." "I would expect nothing less," Cole said gently. "Love isn't diminished by being shared, Margaret. It only grows." Margaret leaned forward and kissed him softly, her lips warm against his. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear and certain. "Ask me again," she whispered. Cole's heart hammered in his chest. "Margaret Fletcher, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." They were married on New Year's Day, 1880, in the small church in Meadow Springs. The children stood beside them, William proudly giving his mother away while Sarah scattered dried flower petals she had saved from the summer garden. Little James carried the rings on a small pillow, managing to make it to the altar without dropping them, though it was a close call. The small cabin felt different when they returned as husband and wife. It was no longer Margaret's home that Cole lived in, but their home, shared equally. That night, after the children were asleep, they stood in the small bedroom that had once belonged to Margaret and Thomas, both nervous as new lovers. "Are you sure about this?" Cole asked, giving her one last chance to change her mind. Margaret's answer was to reach up and unpin her hair, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. She stepped into his arms, and Cole knew he had finally found his home. Spring arrived with new beginnings. The fields were planted, calves were born, and Margaret's stomach began to swell with evidence of their love. The children were thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling, offering suggestions for names and arguing over who would get to hold the baby first. One warm evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. William practiced his reading aloud from a new book Cole had brought from town, while Sarah worked on a small sampler. James dozed in Margaret's lap, his small hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "I was thinking," Cole said casually, "that maybe it's time William started going to the real school in town." Margaret looked up in surprise. That's 10 miles each way. It is, Cole agreed. But he's old enough to make the ride now, especially if I fix up that gentle mare for him. And Sarah will be ready in another year. Margaret considered this, watching her son's proud face as he sounded out the difficult words. He would do well with proper teaching, better than what I can provide here. You've given him a solid foundation, Cole assured her, but he's hungry for more. I see it in his eyes when he finishes a book. Like his father, Margaret said softly, Thomas was always reading, always wanting to learn more. And like his mother, Cole added, squeezing her hand. Don't sell yourself short, Mrs. Matthews. Margaret smiled at her new name. What if, she said slowly, we didn't send just William to school? What do you mean? What if I taught at the school? Margaret's eyes brightened with excitement. The town's growing. I heard Mrs. Peterson say they're looking for another teacher. Cole studied her face. Is that what you want? I think it might be, Margaret said. I've enjoyed teaching the children these past months, and with the baby coming we could use the extra money. We're managing fine, Cole assured her. I know, but it's not just about the money. Margaret looked out at the land they had worked together. I love our home, our life, but I also love teaching. Maybe I can have both. Cole leaned over and kissed her softly. If anyone can, it's you. By the time their daughter Elizabeth was born in late summer, arrangements had been made. Margaret would teach the younger children at the Meadow Springs school 3 days a week. William would ride in with her, while Cole would care for Sarah, James, and the baby on those days. On the days Margaret stayed home, Cole would work their land and the neighboring Peterson farm, increasing their income. It wasn't a conventional arrangement, especially for 1880, but it suited them perfectly. Margaret's natural talent for teaching quickly made her a favorite among the students and their parents. Cole found he enjoyed his days with the younger children, teaching them practical skills while continuing their lessons from Margaret's carefully prepared notes. They need school, Cole had said all those months ago when he first arrived, and Margaret had answered, Then I'll teach them beside the fire. Neither of them could have imagined where that conversation would lead to a blended family, a shared purpose, and a love that had room for both the past and the future. On the anniversary of their marriage, Cole and Margaret stood together on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the yard. William, now 10, was teaching James how to throw a lasso. Sarah sat under a tree, reading to baby Elizabeth, who gurgled happily in her lap. Are you happy? Cole asked, his arm around Margaret's waist. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand coming up to touch the locket that always hung around her neck. Inside, Thomas's picture was now accompanied by a small family portrait taken in town, Margaret, Cole, and all 4 children. More than I ever thought possible, she answered honestly. Thomas sent you to us, I'm sure of it. Maybe he did, Cole agreed, or maybe it was just luck. Not luck, Margaret said firmly. Fate, love, the kind that sees us through loss and leads us to new beginnings. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant golds and crimsons, Cole pulled his wife closer. In the distance, the lights of Meadow Springs began to twinkle like earthbound stars, the growing town a promise of future prosperity. But all that mattered in this moment was here, this home they had built together, these children they were raising with love and learning, this woman who had taught him that hearts, like fires, could be rekindled. I love you, Margaret Matthews, he whispered against her hair. And I love you, Cole Matthews, she answered, turning in his arms to face him. Always.